Welcome to the J&J Show. I'm Jeff, he's Jerry, and tonight we are going to jump into part 3 of our discussion on cryptids. We left off last episode talking about interacting with these beings, and I think Jerry wanted to, didn't you want to specify a couple of things based on that?
Yeah.
I'll let you go ahead and jump into that.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify after the last video, just a couple things that kind of dawned on me that I knew was going to happen. And it's actually quite a few things that should be pretty interesting. One of the first things that I wanted to mention, it was regard to them talking, them being the Squatches, the hairy forest people, and their ability to speak. I had said in there that there's no examples of them interacting or communicating with people as far as through their mouth, and that is true actually. As far as there are no accounts of them knocking on a farmer's back door and asking when the latest batch of chickens is going to show up. That hasn't happened. There's no accounts of them having conversations with hikers, about the woods or whatnot. However, I did want to clarify that they are able to mimic extremely well, almost like a parrot. Not a perfect analogy, but somewhat like that, because there have been plenty of examples, plenty of reports of campers that'll be setting up their camp at nighttime, and they'll be moving around, walking around, and one of the campers will come over and ask the other one, why you keep calling me? And the person, I haven't called you. And the person will insist, I've heard my name called from the woods several times, to enough to where they are able to mimic calling out people's names very well. And of course they do appear to have their own. We have a lot of recordings of their own, what's referred to as the samurai chatter. It's their own language, which we've heard plenty of account. We don't know much about it at all. We just know that they do have the famous Sierra sounds, where Ron Moorhead and his group were up in the Sierras in, I want to say 72, and recorded a bunch of vocalizations that to this day defy explanation. And so obviously, like we said, these beings can speak telepathically, and they speak very well telepathically, very clearly. They can imitate certain things. They can also imitate dogs. It's amazing the number of times. There was one incident down here just and across the border in Carolina, where a lady talked about how they could actually imitate her husband calling the dog really well, to the point where the dog ran off to the woods one time because the dog thought that the father was in the woods. Thankfully, the dog came back. They didn't attack the dog or whatnot. But so I just want to point out that these things can mimic. However, we really don't have examples of conversations going back and forth between these beings unless it be telepathically. And in case people make a face about the telepathic stuff, because that's woo or that's out there, what's his name? I know we mentioned, I forget the guy's name, I always do. The guy who does the Survivor Man on Discovery Channel. And everyone wanted him to go and look into this issue as to whether Bigfoot existed or not. So he did, and he basically came to the conclusion that they do exist. In fact, they are out there. And not only that, but he admitted on radio that they had contacted him telepathically while he was out there, and he just said he couldn't handle that. It was too much, and so he's distanced himself, I think. The Scott Carpenter says the same thing, that they try to make contact with him telepathically, and he absolutely rejects it and refuses to engage in that because he knows what they are. But it's not something, again, another thing I want to point out, it's very important. We're not dealing in 100% absolutes. We're not saying that every single example of one of these beings out there has these capabilities. We just don't know much about them. I mean, we don't know a lot. We don't know why some of them look ape-like or gorilla-like, but most of them look like humans. We don't know what the difference there is. We don't know, how it is that some of them, can disappear into thin air and others don't seem to be able to. We don't know how they can leave one footprint. How do you leave one footprint, in a mud track and no footprints anywhere? We don't, there's a lot of stuff we can't explain about these beings that we really are not 100% on. We don't know. So when we say stuff, we're not saying it's 100%, no exceptions. You can't really say, like a lot of folks say now, you can't really say there are any experts on this topic. There's no such thing as experts, because we don't really know much. We're all trying to learn. And so all we can go by are the reports and the firsthand accounts. And that's why the firsthand accounts are so important to listen to. And that takes me to another thing I wanted to point out, because I know we had a good laugh, and a lot of Steve's group have good laughs about the Bigfoot community and the crowd that goes out and hands out beads and marbles, and they play flutes and hold hands and whatnot, and they really do. I saw another example this past week of somebody who clearly worships these beings. He looks up to them as the closest thing that we're ever going to have to God, and that if we would just listen to them and obey them, then everything would be a lot better. And this straight up, I mean, it definitely. And so we've had kind of some laughs at some people's expense about how foolish it is to go out seeking these things out. But there are a pretty good number of families in this country and in Canada. Not a lot, I'm not saying thousands, but there are documented accounts where families have had interactions with these things, sometimes for generations, and to where they even know individuals. And so I didn't want to make it seem like that I was laughing at them and whatnot, because a lot of these families haven't sought this out, this interaction with these beings. It's kind of happened on its own. And these people are not, they're very well grounded. They're lucky to be interacting with groups of them that behave themselves and don't harass these people. And so, situations like that are different than the people who get into their Prius and drive out of the city to the nearest national forest and then knock on the trees and whistle and sing songs and try to see if they can make contact with Bigfoot. So it's there's a lot of different folks out there that are seeking these things out. I wouldn't recommend, like you said, Jeff, in the last episode, I would recommend not seeking them out at all. But I did want to acknowledge that there are families, there's families in Tennessee, and there's families in, it seems like most of them are in the East, but I'm sure there are probably some out West as well, where they've had generations of interacting. I mean, look at Scott Carpenter and the things that has happened in his yard. They followed him home. Like we said before, he was about 20 miles away in the Smoky Mountains doing his research, and they followed him home. And he talks about it quite a bit. He lives in a neighborhood, just like you would imagine a neighborhood where he has a row of houses behind his house, and a road in front. And so he has neighbors on both sides and behind. And these things would come into his backyard. And, they did all kinds of stuff. Now, they weren't violent or anything like that. As a matter of fact, it's actually kind of funny. He talks about how his dogs were out there, and his dogs would get, worked up when these beings would come in the yard, and they discovered, because they would eat his dog food, these things he found where they were taking handfuls of the dog food and eating it. And apparently they figured out that to keep the dogs quiet, they would give the dogs some of the dog food. Well, the dogs loved this. So it backfired on these beings, though, because it got to the point where every time they came in the yard, the dogs got excited because they were going to get some food, and they would start barking and Scott knew when they were in the backyard at 2:00 in the morning when they started acting like it was treat time, So it's funny to listen to him talk about that. You can hear that on his channel. And let's see, that was two of the things. I did look up leagues. We talked last time about how far a league is, because the one Spanish explorer said that the village on the Mississippi that had giants in it said that it spanned 6 leagues on both sides of the Mississippi. And that is about 20 miles. That's a good sized village. That's not even a village. That's a city when it runs 20 miles on both sides. And that gives you an idea of how many people were in North America prior to the Great Killing, when the disease came in and killed millions of Native Americans that were just killed off. And the population that was left when, like, the Jamestown explorers and all those came, they were just a tiny fraction of how many American Indians had been here prior to this great dying off that they talk about. That's pretty much the only things I wanted to cover up. There was, I mean, some little gaps I wanted to fill in where I felt like I had kind of said stuff that people could misconstrue, and I want to make sure that I pointed out this and that. The one thing I was going to ask you about, Jeff, is this whole debate. You hear so much of it, mostly in the comment section of these videos, that people are talking about: are these things supernatural or are they natural? Because if anyone who comes to this for the first time and realizes that these things are real, that's one of the first questions they ask, because you do get the orbs. They say if you study these things long enough, you'll get orbs, you'll get all sort. Some people claim you'll start seeing UFOs, and other that you get the telepathic speak, but yet there's also footprints. They also eat animals. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is a hotly debated topic in a lot of these comment threads, is whether these things are of the natural world or of the supernatural world. But signs kind of point to it being both. Like you just said, they leave footprints. There's stories of these things being killed. If they can be killed, then, they're probably not supernatural, or, at least they're part human, or, well, I don't want to say human. When we discuss Sasquatch, there's definitely, going back to the DNA thing, there's the half human DNA. So as far as they go, it's possible that they are half human. But as far as other cryptids go, I know there's skinwalkers where, they are humans who shapeshift supposedly into these things. And that's all dark arts, black magic from the Navajo Nation. These things usually only show up where, there's large Navajo populations.
I've heard of that.
Usually out in Arizona. I think Nevada. That may not be right, but out and around Arizona, there's large Navajo reservations and stuff out there. And these people, they're so afraid of the skinwalkers. They won't even say the word skinwalker. They treat it as an off limits topic, but. See, that's another sign that points to what I think is that they're both. Because if they can become physical form in this world, but they're passing through the veil as we believe them to be doing, and, with the mind speak and everything else that goes on with, these encounters, like time slips. People lose track of time. They'll think that they've been in this encounter for 5 minutes. And it turns out, especially the kids, it seems like every child story you hear, and there's been a few adult stories too, that the kids will think that they've been gone for 10 minutes. And then when they come back from this encounter, they find a very distressed parent running up to them and grabbing them and clinging to them. And they're like, you've been gone for 3 days. And there's been a couple of stories I've heard where adults, they'll have these encounters and they'll think, it's lasted 10 minutes, but it's been hours or even days. There was one couple, I forget what they encountered, but I think it might have been a skinwalker, or no, this was a UFO, but they could have sworn they were driving back cross country from a trip. I forget from where to where. I think they were in Arizona. And they might have been coming to Pennsylvania. I'm not too sure about that, but they encountered this UFO and they got out of the car. They pulled over. They saw this thing in the sky, got out of the car. And all of a sudden they just, to a certain point, they just don't remember what happened. And they remember being, I forget if they woke up where they were, or if they woke up back home in Pennsylvania. I think it was where they were, and they ended up driving home, and they get home and their answer machine, this is before cell phones, their answer machine is full of messages from relatives like, where are you at? And police knock on the door not too long after they get home, and they'd been missing for 3 days.
Wow.
They have no recollection of what happened or anything, but that was a UFO story. But that kind of makes me think that those two are kind of related too, because,
well, sure,
there's these time slippages. So if, all of this stuff, this supernatural stuff happens around these encounters, yet these things are physical form because, like you said, they leave footprints, they leave clumps of fur, they leave feces. They attack us, but demons attack us too, and they're supernatural. I don't think they have physical form unless, of course, they
correct
possess somebody. I heard a really wild possession story last night on YouTube. It was pretty crazy, but they everything points to, going back to your original question from what feels like a time slip here from an hour ago.
No.
Going back to your original question, I think it's a little of both, and I don't want to steal your thunder with the DNA thing, so I'll let you.
No, go ahead. I don't have anything to say about that.
All right, so if half the DNA is human and the other half is unknown, and that points to them being the descendants of the Nephilim, of these fallen angels who came down and mated with the human women. That points to them being both, because angels are supernatural, yet the women are physical.
Right.
They're of the natural realm, physical realm, like we are, but the angels are from the supernatural realm. So that, and you said this before the show, the unknown DNA is always from the father's side. Right. So if they have physical form DNA and they have natural or supernatural DNA, you got to kind of think that they're a little of both. So that's
I mean, I have no problems. I have no problems with that whatsoever. It's not, when you look, and like I said, biblically, you look at the angels and how they interacted. They were able to interact both. They were able to wrestle around with Jacob on the ground all night long, and yet they were able to take off and disappear once the sun came up. They were able to eat food with Abraham. They were able to touch men in Sodom and drive them away of blindness. So which none of us, we can't just throw our hands out and blind a whole bunch of people and whatnot. So it's I guess for Christians, this is where we have a little bit of an advantage, because for us, it's not difficult at all to see where something can operate in both the natural and the supernatural, because Christians are able to do the same thing.
I had another point to make real quick. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. No, go ahead.
The fact that you just said that the angels would disappear, and there's all kinds of stories out there where the people, they'll look and they'll see something, they'll turn and they'll look back and the thing's just gone. And that again just points to them being, having at least a supernatural side to them, because they're there 1 second and they're gone the next. Just like the angels you just said, that made me think of that. So I just wanted to add that real quick.
There's no doubt at this point now that they can do that they can. They don't seem to be able to do it at will. It seems there's a theory that it requires a lot of energy on their part to disappear like that, because the fact of the matter is, if they could do it at will, then Patty in the Patterson film would have disappeared. And we have other examples where it would benefit them to disappear, and yet they don't. So again, that doesn't mean that they can't. It means that either some of them are not able to, or that at times they're not able to, even if they can normally, they're not able to if they don't have the proper amount of energy, or we just don't understand exactly how that. All we can do is try to put the puzzle pieces together as best we can, and to be flexible enough. On a lot of this stuff, I really don't like to be 100% like on any one thing, because my views on this have changed. I do know there was a gentleman that whose show I've recommended and that I really like, and I heard him just today say that he thinks they're wild animals, and that's one thing I do reject 100%. These are not just a different version of a bear or a deer. These are completely and totally different than animals, for sure. Another thing I wanted to clarify, I forgot about, Jeff, was I might have misspoken last time. I might have given the wrong impression. I do believe 100% that these things, I say 100%, 90%, because it may not be, 90% that these things are Nephilim, that they are from the fallen angels. However, that is different than them being the descendants of the giants. And I feel like I kind of mixed that a little bit too much. In other words, they could totally be descendants of the fallen angels and Nephilim, and of the enemy's camp and still not be clean ancestors of the giants. And the answer to that is the whole petri dish theory, and that is like the Dogman, the skinwalkers, these other cryptids, that they are the result of genetic tampering that the ancient Hebrews talked about, where when the ancient Hebrews said they sinned against animals. That's what it's referring to, that they engaged in mixing. It actually says that, that they engaged in mixing. And so that's my only qualm. If they're, I fully believe they are a result of the angelic misconduct before and after the flood. That does not necessarily mean that they are straight up descendants of Goliath and Og and all the other giants. I think they probably are. But even if they're not, they could still be the result of angelic misbehavior and what they made. Because look, I don't think Dogman's is a descendant of the giants, and yet clearly something, they were created. And another thing about the Dogman, real quick, because I know it sounds ridiculous. I'd never even heard of the Dogman until like 2016. I started listening to Brenton Solon's channel, who's passed away now, unfortunately. And they started talking about it. I'm like, what on earth is Dogman? That is ridiculous sounding. And it is ridiculous sounding until you really, but I tell you, it's far more intense and scary than the Bigfoot thing is. And in a way, they almost seem, yes, they're more sinister, but they also seem more intelligent. They have done things that you can't just put them in a box. Yeah, they seem a lot nastier, a lot meaner. I have no doubt they kill more people than Bigfoot. And yet we do have a few encounters, just like with Bigfoot, where they have behaved in a different way. There was one guy in Alabama, and this is on the Dogman Encounters channel. And like I said, if anyone doubts about the Dogman thing, just go to Bigfoot Encounters Radio. Bigfoot Encounters Radio, not Bigfoot Encounters, because that guy's kind of a charlatan, but Bigfoot Encounters Radio. Look, he has about 400 episodes up there, over 400 episodes now. Each one of these is a person giving their first person account of what they've been through. And many of these people break down on the course of the episode because of post-traumatic stress. And many of them, not all of them, maybe not even most, but a lot of them break down and have to take a break because it's so traumatizing. But there was the one gentleman that I was just talking about from Alabama, and he was having interactions with these things. His family member, his uncle or grandfather, somebody had shot and killed one and buried it on their property. So he was having some interactions with these things that weren't overly positive. And then he started having interactions with these crawler beings. And one time, long story short, he was back at one of his ponds and saw one of these dogmen. And as he was looking at it, he noticed it was looking at him. And at the same time, he noticed across the pond one of these rake creatures. And he said that the dogman telepathically told him, the dogman pointed to the crawler, the rake thing, and said, "That's your enemy, not us." So, you make of that what you will. Clearly here we have, one of the very few times, and there are people who called into Vic Cundiff's show, the Dogman Encounters Radio, that have these beings around their property, and they don't mind it. They've seen them several times. And one old lady says it makes her feel a little bit more secure knowing they're around. I'm not going to tell people how to feel because I'm not in their situation, but the vast majority of the people, when they encounter these things, it's not positive. But there's always exceptions. I really want to stress that with this. This is not 100% with a lot of these things. As for the missing time that you brought up, very good point. Just last night, Scott Carpenter on his show had a video talking about the only time he ever had that, and he actually caught it on video, and he was going through and video recording, and he was videotaping across this dry gully into the woods, and he found out later, catching a Sasquatch, which you can see quite clearly when he zooms in, on camera. But yet, instead of focusing in on it, he said inexplicably, he turns around and walks away. And he still can't remember exactly what happened. He kind of came to later. And he caught this thing on camera, and it had its mouth open. You can see its teeth and whatnot. And he was saying that this is how they do infrasound being a low decibel frequency that certain animals can put out. Lions use it, whales use it to paralyze, cause disorientation. People theorize that Sasquatch uses it to, and that's part of what causes some of the missing time. We don't really know. This is all stuff that, but like you said, the missing time comes up again and again, especially in the missing 411 for those few people who survive.
Well, to that point that you just made about him unwillingly, just turning around, inexplicably turning around and walking away, going back to what you said about mimicking, they, not just Sasquatch, but other cryptids, especially the Wendigo, especially the Skinwalker, and I think, I'm not sure, I won't mention that one, but Skinwalker and Wendigo definitely can mimic. They mimic voices of your relatives. I've heard stories where they mimic somebody's grandmother, and this person is out in the middle of nowhere and they know that their grandmother's 3,000 miles away and it could not possibly be them. Right. There's stories to that point though. They mimic that to try to lure you into the woods.
Right.
And there's been other stories, and it's kind of like what you just said with the luring. People they just inexplicably just start trying to walk into the woods. Excuse me. There's multiple stories I've heard where the group of people there'll be a group of people. They'll all be out in the woods. One specifically sticks out in my head because it happened in the North Carolina mountains. They said that this guy just all of a sudden got up, no shirt on. It was fall, so it was warm during the day. He was barefoot, no shirt on. It was starting to get chilly because it was starting to evening. And he just inexplicably stands up and walks off into the woods, and they're yelling his name and he's not responding, and they're trying to stop him, but he just keeps going. And he takes off running. They like go and try to catch him, but he takes off running and they can't catch him. And when they I think when they ended up finding him, because he did end up reemerging, he doesn't know what happened. He doesn't know what came over him. He doesn't know why he would just walk off into the woods. In fact, I don't even think he remembered doing it. So that points to the fact that, I don't want to call it mind control, but that subsonic wavelength that they can put out. Because I've heard of Bigfoot stories too, where they encounter a Bigfoot and then they just inexplicably just turn and walk away, or they inexplicably remember it up until a certain point, and then all of a sudden they're just like back at their camp, or right. They're back at their car and they don't remember how they got there. That all goes toward the mimicking. And I believe, that guy was obviously, I don't remember him specifically mentioning mimicking or hearing a voice or something, but he was lured into the woods by something. And that actually was a missing 411 case. But there are other cases. There's another channel that plays, the title of the videos are "I was almost a missing 411 case." I forget the name of the channel. I wish I could remember it. But if you want to listen to those stories, it's from people who believe they almost became a missing 411 case, and they describe the same thing: hearing familiar voices, being lured into the woods, and they think it all ties into these missing 411 cases in these national parks. Because one person, she was with, I don't remember if it was a man with his friend or a female with her boyfriend, but whoever it was, they looked into the woods and they saw the person that they were with just beyond the tree line. And the person was like motioning toward them, trying to get them to come into the woods. And then they looked to their left and there's the person. And they look back and it's the same person. And there's two of them. So it
Good
is
grief.
a doppelganger. So I mean, that to me points to demonic activity.
Oh yeah,
But
sure.
just the things, these things like trying to lure people into the woods, and I think it. I mean, it all kind of ties together. If you ask me,
Oh yeah,
it's all of an evil nature. That's all from the other team. But that just points more toward, to me at least, these things, they do have the supernatural power, but there they are in their physical form, and I just believe that they're both.
sure. Well,
Simply
the
put.
the the Squatches are just like one part of it. The Sasquatch is one component, and as you look into the 411, the missing 411, that's when you really begin to realize that something, and you and I know what, is preying upon mankind, and that's the devil who comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And we don't know why they're able to take some and not others, but it's definitely the case. I mean, he would kill all of us if he could. So, um, I don't want to attach the missing 411. People talk about the Bigfoot or the Dogmen or the aliens. To be perfectly honest, it's all the above. And it may not be that the Squatches have a long history going way back to the Native Americans of taking children. And we don't know exactly why. It's not 100% that it's that they're that they're looking to kill them. We don't know if they are looking to adopt them or what the case may be. It's not good. Obviously, I'm not saying it's a good thing. And I think that a large number of these kids are eventually killed because they're never found or seen again. There is an example in the 1800s in eastern North Carolina of one of these beings that snatched a kid out of his playpen and was heading off to the woods. This was in like the 1870s in a newspaper down in North Carolina. And some of the men were nearby and grabbed their rifles and started running across the field after this giant that was dragging the kid behind it like the gorilla did Harambe, basically. And they started firing, and the thing dropped the kid and just took off. And so that child was lucky. There's another story. It was a summer youth camp out in the woods. I can't remember what state. I know this was on Brenton Sawin's show a number of years ago. And the guy who called in was a youth counselor at the time. And it was right about dusk. And one of these beings snatched a kid who had gotten too close to the woods and was running off down the trail. And he managed somehow to catch up with the thing. And it dropped the kid and got behind a tree and was laughing about it. The being thought it was hilarious in a real, demented tone. There's two cases where the kids, came back, but we hear all the time the missing 411 where these kids vanish. And at times there was the one here last year was Eastern Kentucky where the remains of the child were found way up in a tree. And people said, oh, well, see, that was a cougar or whatnot, or a mountain lion that did that. Yeah, well, the kid was in his house. They don't usually come in through locked door to closed doors and stuff. Mountain lions, that is. And there's a million examples of kids, and these are on these shows now. Even you can hear people talking that their kid came in and said weird stuff like the dog-faced man is at my window again, and they'll run to the kid's room, and of course it's gone. But it goes on all the time, and the little kid will say they were calling for me to come outside, and it's the Squatches do the same thing. The kids will report they wanted me to come out and play, and I've heard of parents on these shows that are reporting that they caught their kid going out the front door at like 2 a.m. to go play with the monkey people or whatever goofy name. But these beings are clearly trying to lure these kids out of their homes. Now take that, what we know from these reports, and add that to the missing 411, where large numbers of kids are going missing inexplicably. And I think you got to be kind of dense to say the two of those are not related in any way, shape, or form. Especially when the American Indians, like I said before, told the pioneers, the frontiersmen, to watch out for your kids because these beings, they'll snatch them.
Right.
And it's not just kids. Like I said in the last video, the one man was picking blueberries and went to bed that night and woke up and he was being carried through the woods by something. And they didn't hurt him, but we don't know what they would have done eventually. We just don't know. We don't know. We don't know. But something is taking these kids. It's probably not, just one thing. A lot of this, you hear a lot about baby crying, and people say, well, that's a bobcat that sounds like a baby crying. And it may be, but I know one thing, a lot of these people that talk about hearing the baby crying, or they hear the sound, what sounds like a woman being killed in the woods. And you can tell it's intended to get people to go out into the woods to help either the baby or the woman who's in distress. And then something bad's going to happen to them. And I think that's what kicks off a lot of these 411 cases.
What you just said, the baby crying in the woods and the woman screaming, I've heard that happen numerous times in Wendigo stories and Skinwalker stories.
Yeah. And,
just trying to lure them into the woods. But going back to what you're saying about the kids, sometimes they disappear and unfortunately they're never seen again, or their body is found, like you said, in an impossible place, like really up high. I remember one was found up a cliff. It was like a 50-foot cliff that they had to get equipment, and it took them a good long while to scale this cliff just to get up to this body. And, supposedly a 5-year-old climbs this thing by himself, or he's dragged up there by a mountain lion. The mountain lion's going to scale a 50-foot cliff while carrying a body. Right. And, also they're also found very far away. There was one where this kid was found alive, but he was like 25 miles away in less than 24 hours. It's like, how does a 3-year-old go 24 miles away, 25 miles away? I think one was found 50 miles away in like 2-3 days.
And cross rivers and stuff. I mean, how does that happen?
Across rivers, across rough terrain, across dense forests, across mountains. And, these are 3 to 5-year-old kids. How do they, how do they survive that long, 2-3 days, much less one day? And how do they travel that far of a distance?
Well, the David Paulides has stated many times, he's the for those who don't know, the one who really has kicked off the missing 411. He's a great guy, and he has a great YouTube channel as well that I encourage people to look into. He has said that the occasions where these children are found alive, routinely, it's as if something has put them there. In other words, they're found up underneath a bush or somewhere where it's obvious to searchers that they can find. And people can laugh, people can say what they want, but in my opinion, those situations are cases where an angel has intervened on behalf of this child and is seeing to it that the child is returned to its family. I don't know, maybe the parents are praying. All parents pray when they're in a panic state and whatnot. But I'm here to tell you, it makes a big difference when you pray to the Lord and he knows your voice because he hears your voice every day. You have a relationship with him. And then somebody who has, scoffed at the Lord, and all of a sudden they get into a bind and they want the Lord to intervene on their behalf. Now, sometimes he will. But I truly believe deep down that these children who are found, and when it's a situation where they're found, sitting on a trail, and they'll say that it's amazing how it looks as if the kid hasn't even been outside. Here they've been gone for 2 days. Their clothes are not dirty. The kid should have frozen to death, and yet they have somehow managed to survive. I'm convinced that this is a situation where angels are interfering and are intervening on behalf of these children and saving them. And
a lot of them. Sorry, a lot of them.
No, go ahead.
A lot of them come back talking about how the hairy man kept me warm, or the bear man kept me warm and fed me. And I remember one specifically where the kid called it a bear man and said it fed him. It's like, oh well, this bear. Their rational explanation for this was a bear took care of this kid and fed him. And they they asked the kids, like, how did the bear feed you? And he said like this, and he held his hand out like that. And they're like, bears don't do that. Bears can't do that. It's like bears would not. They like the thing had berries and it held its hand out like that and gave the kid berries. It's like, that's not a bear. That couldn't have been a bear. But a lot of people will accept the bear argument just because they don't want to think about what actually might be out there. And
see, this leads us into, another split in our logic, because if a being wanted to, and I don't doubt what those kids are saying, and if a being wanted to, they could kill these kids as soon as they get out of sight, instantaneously. And yet clearly some cases they've had these kids for a couple days and are feeding them or keeping them from freezing. So we cannot say that all of it is just to kill people, because there are situations where they haven't killed people. So we got to try to look deeper and think, now there's other situations where, like I said, the children is found dead and mangled up in a tree. So there's other cases where clearly the being in that case had malevolent intentions and killed and not just children, all kinds of people. I don't know if you saw the one story recently that, even for myself, who've been studying this for a long time, it was really an eye opener, I have to say, because it was out of Florida. It was on the Donovan Dredd show. It's out of Florida. The guy wrote in, and he was the only survivor of a 5-man camping trip in the Everglades. And he actually witnessed this Dogman, tear into their camp and begin killing his friend. He took off running. He said he just couldn't help it. He didn't think about being courageous. He just ran. He didn't know what, and he managed to, he broke his leg. He was running so hard, he tripped over it. He got into a shack somewhere and closed the door, and that's where they found him. But all 4 of his friends were not just killed, but I mean, just a horror movie couldn't do justice to, he said, what was found. Not enough to even be able to identify the bodies. And that mirrors some of the accounts we've heard that seem to be, in fact, true, coming out of the LBL, which is the land between the lakes, that area in Kentucky, where you have the two lakes. The Tennessee River forms the 2 lakes, and the area in between the two is some sort of a national preserve or something, and it is just fraught with all kinds of horrible. And the worst account being this attack that occurred on a family that was up in there camping back in the early 80s. And so these things do happen. Just like I said, the people being harassed in their homes out in the country, that does happen. However, I'm not sitting here suggesting that most homes out in the country, have interactions with because clearly most of them don't. It's a minority, but it's enough of a minority to be concerning, and you need to be aware of it. I mean, I live, I live out near the country and whatnot. I don't worry about this stuff. I want to go back in the woods, I go back in the woods. I want to go out in the yard at nighttime, I go out in the yard at nighttime. I don't live in fear, because I know that he that's within me is greater than he that rules the world, and or that's in the world, although he is the ruler of this present world. And so I don't live in fear of it, but I'm aware of what the situation. And that's the main thing that people need to be aware of all this and not be ignorant. You don't have to become a big student of it all of a sudden, but just be aware. Don't be, deceived by what a lot of the people will dismiss. Like you said, they'll claim it was a bear, or like we said the other night, the squirrel that threw the log through somebody's windshield, and ridiculous explanations like that. And there's a lot of ridiculous explanations, and people are, I think, like I said, since the government has admitted the UFOs, the government spent 70 years discrediting people who had witnessed the UFOs, and now just one day in 2017 they come out and say, oh well, yeah, we don't know what those things are, but they actually exist. It's like, oh well, gee, how about all those people that lost their jobs and got discredited, and but. And who knows why?
All those people who were ridiculed and bullied and, all that. What about them?
Well, the Philip Schneider, the whistleblowers. Here's a guy who came out and, blew the whistle on a lot of the stuff that he saw in Arizona, I believe, New Mexico, and one of the bases. And he was telling everything he saw, and he ended up committing suicide, they said. Now, in this day and age, I don't know of anybody who would commit suicide by tying a catheter around their neck and suffocating themselves. And yet we're supposed to believe that's what he did. And, they had already tried to kill him once before. Very interesting. The Philip Schneider, if you looked at it, that's more of a UFO thing. That's what he had first. He was a whistleblower. And a lot of these whistleblowers end up committing suicide, strangely, which they don't. They're rubbed out to keep quiet. And a whole nother thing. That can't remember the guy's website. There's a lot of this. People who have either accidentally killed these beings or had some sort of interaction where they have obtained substantive proof of these creatures, whether it's a body or any number. They are flat out threatened by government officials, and they make no bones. They will say, and this isn't just the things that Jeff and I are saying, folks, on this channel. Is not just one incident. I mean, when I say this, I've heard this particular thing at least from a dozen different people. So what are the chances that all 12 decide they were going to make something up? But they reported that they were told that they would, well, take, for example, the guy that was on the Britton Solon show. He was a game warden and was out in looking for poachers. I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, maybe. And he and his dog looking for poachers out, I want to say it was Wyoming. And he ran into a group of these squatches on a hillside. And man, they just knocked him silly and he woke up just long enough from the tree he was thrown against to see them tearing his dog, his German Shepherd, who was his best friend, apart. And he was so beaten up, they had taken him to the hospital. They didn't kill him, but he was broken bones and all sorts of. And when he was in the hospital, he submitted his report once he got a little better and talked about seeing numerous of these giants. The guy actually said that some of the creatures looked like small ones that were standing there taking notes. They weren't actually taking notes in a notebook, but they were observing what was going on and learning from the bigger ones. And his boss came in and told him and said, this report, you're going to have to resubmit this because you were attacked by a bear. And he was like, there wasn't a bear. And and the guy said, if you want to keep your job, you're going to resubmit this. And in it, you will say you were attacked by a brown bear. And that's simple as that. And if you refuse to, not only will you lose your job, but we'll see to it that you end up in some sort of a mental facility. And this happens. And one lady in Missouri somewhere, Oklahoma, she managed to shoot one of these things that was in her backyard with a handgun and managed to kill it. And she was hauled off to jail that night. And the kids were basically dropped off. The government officials dropped the kids off at the neighbor's house. And they told her, said, this didn't happen. If you ever mention anything about this, you're going to lose your job. And not only that, you're never going to get another good job. We'll see to that. And you'll probably lose your kids also. We'll see to it that you're considered a poor parent and that your kids will be taken and put in juvenile services. So think about that if you ever want to. So that's what happens. That's how the government deals with this kind of thing. And we've heard it enough to know, and we've seen enough now of our current government and how they operate, the heavy-handed police tactics, and how we're devolving into a police state, basically, here in the United States. And so the more we see of this, then we realize that the other people have been treated the same way.
With all these encounters and, them looking into people's homes and trying to lure them out of their homes, and they just, people catch on watching them. I mean, these beings are obviously interested in humans. They're obviously watching us, studying us. I guess, I don't know. One reason why they could take people and then bring them back is that, they want to find out more about us. Maybe they're studying this person that they took. They're learning about them for some reason. I mean, I couldn't even possibly begin to, describe why, but I mean, they're obviously very interested in us. I don't know if it comes from a place of jealousy, maybe, because, God loves us no matter what. And, right. Them obviously being of evil. I mean, yeah, I'm just going, yeah. If obviously them being of evil, they're not going to get that love from God that right. we get. And, maybe it comes from a place of jealousy. Maybe that's why some of them hate us so much. But I don't know. They're obviously interested in us for a reason. And, I couldn't even possibly begin to understand why. Maybe it's because, they want to know. So when the veil's lifted and they're unleashed, that they know exactly what they're dealing with. They know their prey. They're getting to know their prey. But what you mentioned earlier about not being afraid to go outside in the dark and stuff, and yeah, me either. I know I'm protected. I know these things aren't going to mess with me because I'm protected. So
right.
But
I don't plan on doing any primitive camping out in wilderness areas though. I'm not going to push it.
I definitely don't plan on seeking these things out. You know, if I'll sit and listen to stories all day, but I don't ever want to be one of those stories. I don't ever need to see one, you know.
Well, getting back to the reason why they're so interested in us, and again, like all the stuff we throw out here, I can't prove this, but I go to the source for myself, and that's the Bible. And if these beings are half angelic, which the DNA suggests, the Bible suggests they are, the DNA supports that. The Bible does indicate that angels are fascinated with humans. It says that the angels long to look into human affairs, and the Bible talks about that. It says that the original 200 that came down and committed this sin, they were watchers, which their main job was to watch over and to help people. So it's part of them to be interested in people. And I think that the fact that these beings are, the Dogmen don't seem to be as much. They don't seem to be very curious at all. But the Squatches certainly do. Like you said, you do have accounts where they are seen just staring at people. We have a lot of accounts of them saving people from drowning when they they could just turn around and walk off into the woods and the person would drown, but yet they drag the person out. And like, again, I like to stress, these are, I think we have to accept the fact that there seems to be a couple different types. There seems to be a batch of these, and you know, they claim, and I dismissed this at first, but you never know. They claim, these beings, that is, especially out in rural areas where they can observe people, that they will get attached to individuals that they're able to observe, whether they're working out in their yard or whatnot, and they set themselves up as like protectors of these individuals. That's what people claim who have interacted with these beings a lot, that they have spoken telepathically, that they do get attached to people and will set themselves up as protectors when they're out in the woods and whatnot. And you know what's crazy is there is actually an account on Vic's show, the Dogman Encounters, of a guy that is being about to be killed by a dogman, and darn if the Squatch doesn't intervene and save his life. And crazy, you know, you just can't hammer down this situation. You can't hammer this down to be 100% anything. You just have to go with generalities, because as soon as you think, well, these beings are all good and we could learn so much from them, then you hear about the cannibalistic aspects of some of them. I think the only way that we can really approach it is realizing that they have half human DNA. I'm talking about the Squatches, that is. And just like humans, you're going to have ones that are murderous and others that are loners that stay off and you never see them, others that are downright friendly. But regardless, I just don't feel like we're supposed to be interacting with them. And so I think it's just safe to just distance from that and not be tempted like so many people. Because, you know, just like they're interested in us, think about this. How many people do you know who have no interest whatsoever in this topic? I mean, there's a few, but most people, there's a reason why the highest rated documentary of all time, all the highest rated documentaries of all time on cable television, we're all dealing with this subject, all of them. If you put this on TV, it will get super high ratings. People are interested. Even the scofftics are interested. And it's because we're interested in the unknown as well. It's part of our DNA to be interested in the unknown and the unexplained. Now, a lot of the scientists will say that, see, we have a deep-seated desire to make up monsters and myths, and we want to believe in these things. And there may be some truth in that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these things aren't happening, because the fact of the matter is, if you can put somebody to death on the word of several eyewitnesses, then I think that we can assume on the word of thousands of eyewitnesses that these beings are actually out there. And I'm, for one, I'm not willing to tell all these people that they're insane and that they just mistook it for a bear. There's not that many bear. These things are seen in areas where there are no bear. And so, but that's the explanation. That's the first one. You know, you got the gas, swamp gas explains all the orbs and the UFOs, and then you got bears explain Bigfoot and whatnot, and wolf is what explains. And the Dogman, it is tricky because they do go down on all fours and run like a wolf, but they're just far larger. And then once they get up on two legs and run, then you know, people say that's when the fear really hits.
No, it's just an oversized wolf who's learned a new trick. And going back to some of the Sasquatch, wanting to protect us and some wanting to kill us, maybe it's that angelic side, the dominant DNA that makes them want to protect us. And then, the other ones are affected more by their human DNA and they just want to kill all of us. So,
It's true.
Maybe
you just at this point,
I say it tongue in cheek, but who knows? That's just one possible theory because, the angels are, they're, like you said, the watchers, they were supposed to protect us. And, if they come down and they mate with these women, then these beings have angelic side, which, obviously they're very interested in humans and maybe they do want to protect us. Then there's the human side who, that's a crapshoot. there's no telling what's going to happen there because people are, I don't want to say inherently bad, but our human nature gets the best of us more times than we'd like to admit. Yeah, but it's that's a good point. Yeah, I think one thing that people again might ask, why look into all this and why have you looked into all this? And it's because you have to look at the world as it is, and once you realize that the Lord is real, and you interact with him and he is spirit but he affects our lives, if you have a relationship with him, this world, and as we're seeing more and more, is not a human friendly place. And we really are, it seems like at times as you look through all this, like so many deer that are just kind of wandering through the woods around with all these predators. There's a lot of things in this world that hate humans and want to prey on humans, and they're doing it. And the reason why I bring this up is that it's knowing the Lord is a must, because these beings, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. That's an exaggeration. I've heard it at least 100 times. They do not like the name of Jesus. They want no part of him or any Christian. They know that Christians can do them in, and that, we can't physically ourselves, but if the Lord sends in angels, these things don't stand a chance. And that's all ridiculous. That's crazy. I'm not. Well, if you don't have to believe it, but the fact of the matter is, it's true. And but the only thing that we have to remember is that we're focusing on the Lord and that we don't go out. And there was one time I remember back in the 90s. I may have already told this story. But back in the 90s, and I was looking into this subject, I was fascinated. But back then, you couldn't go online and watch documentaries. You had to wait for A&E to put something out and then record it and watch that same video over and over and over and over until you memorized it. But there was one time, and I forget what the details were, and I was looking into something, and I was kind of going down that path a little bit of thinking that these were good things and, wanting to interact. And I felt a distinct check in my spirit. I still remember where I was in my den. Distinct check in my spirit where I could tell the Lord didn't like it, and I knew that he didn't like it. And it was really I was like, whoa, where'd that come from? And I began to think about it, and that's my first clue that this is not just about some animals that haven't been discovered. This is different, and it's been a long road to get to where I am now, realizing that a lot of this stuff is interconnected. I just don't see where you can separate these beings from the UFO sightings and what. Now, as for the Loch Ness monster stuff, I don't know anything about. I don't know. That could just be a situation with that where you literally have some animals that have not gone extinct. I don't think that's necessarily a supernatural thing. It's very interesting, but I think that's more of a natural phenomenon where you may have same thing with the dinosaurs and sub-Saharan Africa that have been seen. I don't think this is anything demonic. I think it's just a matter of animals not having. But I know one thing: science doesn't want you talking about it, because if they ever find, well, they already have. They found the coelacanth, which supposedly went extinct 60 million years ago, and now they have them in tanks swimming around. And so that's a whole nother story. Maybe we can get to some other time. Well, I mean,
which is a lot of fun.
Getting into that, there's no telling what's in the bottom of the ocean and the depths that no human can go. There's giant fish down there that are unchecked by the restraints of their surroundings. Like there's some fish that if they live in a lake, they can only get so big, but if you put them in a larger body of water, they can become way bigger than you would think. So there's no telling what's down there on the ocean floor, way down in the deep depths of the deepest parts of the ocean. What you just said about the Lord checking you brought a question up to me. That, do you think he minds us looking into this? Do you think he wants us looking into this subject? I mean, what do you think?
As long as we keep him first, I have never had a check like that ever since then, because I don't come to this looking at these beings as I don't give them glory. In other words, and Bible talks about that a lot. I give all the glory to him. He knows that when I look into this, I'm trying to learn, the interaction. But all the glory goes to him, and he knows that I know that were it not for him and his protective hand, these beings could be harassing me in my yard or in my house, just by the grace of. So I don't think he has an issue with it at all, as long as he's first. I would not stop. I do not stop my Bible reading. I don't skip prayer time. I keep my study of this to a minority of my time. I keep it in check and whatnot. It never gets to the point where I'm obsessed with it. I'm very interested, not obsessed. And like I said, he always knows that I don't glorify these things. I'd much rather be sitting in that chair over there and have him speak to me like he has before, than ever go out and see one of these hairy monsters running around. I don't even want to see one of these hairy monsters running around.
Yeah, me either. I think one reason why this subject piques my interest so much is because I did have a run-in with evil. I'll call it a demon. I'm not really sure if it was a demon, but I had something, I've talked about it before, stalking me. And, when you experience something like that, it definitely sticks with you. Now the fear that I felt has been completely stripped away. I am no longer afraid that, of being, it got to the point where this thing had me afraid of being in a dark room. And,
sure.
I'll turn the lights off now. Like if I'm going to bed, I turn the lights off in a room and it's dark and I have to walk through that room to get to the door to go into the hallway. It doesn't bother me anymore. It used to really bother me. I used to be peeking in the corners, but that's the thing, is the fear factor of it. But see, I've experienced that. So when we start talking about this and you start associating it with giants and the Nephilim and the evil team, I call it the other team, the enemy. When you start associating them with the enemy, that's when it really starts to pique my interest. It's because, I've experienced evil, and, what else is out there? What else is out there? And all signs seem to point toward these beings being on the enemy team. So, that's one of the reasons why it piques my interest so much. All right. I think that's going to do it for this episode. I've started closing out every episode by saying this, so I'll do it here also. We don't do this for the views. We don't do this to get as many subscribers as possible. We do this because we feel like God has called us, first and foremost. He has called us to do this and puts it on us to relay his message that he gives to us. And just to try to tie everything, especially with a subject like this. I know it might be confusing. It's like, why would God want you to talk about cryptids? But I don't know. I think there's a lot of questions out there as to what these beings are. And I think, just trying to make sense of it, trying to tie it to the Bible and the end times, because obviously the signs are there. We're approaching the end, and it looks like it's coming pretty fast these days. So I think maybe it's more along the lines of trying to just know what you're dealing with, what we're about to go through with the end of times, if it does happen in our lifetimes. But I think it's just an informative subject that, obviously it correlates with a lot of things in the Bible. And I think one of the biggest things that it does correlate to is the passage in Revelation where it says the veil will be lifted and these creatures will be unleashed upon the earth. Now, I'm not saying it's these creatures directly. I mean, it could be. We don't know. That's the whole point, is that, we don't know. We're not meant to know. But, just trying to shed light, like Jerry says, we're just trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And I think, that's something that God has obviously called us to do, because we're here talking about it. But, we're not here to try to monetize this channel. We're not here to try to get, 1 million subscribers. It'd be great if we did, because we'd be getting our message out. Well, not our message, but God's message, which is relayed through us. But Jerry, did you have anything else to add? Or
just to agree with you that the reason why this is important is because it's a part of our world, and if you can wake people up, sometimes they don't want to be woken up to God and Jesus, which is horrible, but it's true. But if people realize that all this stuff that's happening is part of our world and it's real, then maybe it'll shock them into realizing, it's shocked a lot of people into realizing that they need to get on the right side, because just sitting, watching American Idol or the NFL and whatnot and thinking you're going to, wind up in heaven, that's not going to cut it. And the forces of darkness in this world are very active, especially at this time. And if you're not in the King's army, you're going to be prey. And so we're just trying to, if we can't hand out tracts to people and get them to because it seems like people nowadays don't really want to hear a lot about the Lord, then once they hear about this stuff and realize it's real, all of a sudden they get a lot more willing to hear about the Lord, because it's the only way you're going to be protected from these things.
Well, like you just said, the Lord's army is growing. Well, so is the enemy army. There's accounts, hundreds, thousands of accounts that come in daily to these different YouTube channels from across the world. The enemy army is growing. Unfortunately, it's claimed a lot of human souls to this point. Nobody's beyond saving, but we're trying to grow the angelic army. We're trying to bring people, like you said, wake them up and bring them to the good side, bring them to the light side, to quote Star Wars there.
Sure.
You knew I'd eventually work in a Star Wars quote at some point. But we're just, like you said, trying to wake people up. And those people that go missing, when they went out to hike that day, they didn't think it was going to be their last day on earth. And next thing they know, they were standing before the Lord. I don't know, get vary on how long, whether they were killed instantly or what, but whatever, these are real people that we're talking about that have disappeared and have lost their lives. They aren't just a figment. The pictures adorn the cover and the inside of every 411 book. These are actual people with families and names. They disappeared. Their lives were snuffed out that quick. They weren't planning on, just like a car accident could put you in front of the Lord at any time. At any time, we don't know when we're going to take our last breath. And do not want to end up in hell. I hate to end on that note, but it's true. If you can appeal to people, you do not want, and my uncle-in-law just passed away, and I'm happy to say, he knew the Lord. So it's a time of rejoicing for us. But if he hadn't have, bad news. Well, like you said, you never know when you're going to go, so you need to be prepared. And there's no better way to be prepared than getting to know God through Jesus. So start there. Also, going to your point, Jesus, I've heard in numerous accounts, I know we've mentioned this before, and I want to throw it in real quick before we close out, that these beings have been repelled by the name of Jesus. People have used the name of Jesus to send these creatures away, to stop harassing them, to avoid being attacked or taken. And that's another big thing, is they're prepared for that, and because they're on the right team. They know they can dispel the forces of darkness that way. All right, I think that's a good enough epilogue for this episode. Be sure to join us next time. We'll see you then. God bless.
Bye.